Wyoming Territory, January 1887. The wind cut like a whip across the plains as Odessa Albright leaned into the blizzard, clutching her baby tighter beneath her coat. Snow clung to her lashes, her skirts frozen stiff around her legs. Her boots had soaked through miles ago. The boy in her arms, barely 3 months, let out a weak cry, then quieted. That silence scared her more than the wind. She had not planned to end up out here, not like this. But when the wagon train left her behind in Rawlins, and no one would take in a woman with a baby and no husband, she had no choice. South Pass was still days away on foot, but she had heard there was a ranch west of Elk Mountain, run by a man who hired without too many questions. She had never been good at gambling, but she was out of cards. Odessa stumbled through a drift and spotted a flicker of orange light ahead, firelight, through the haze. Her heart kicked hard. With her last strength, she made for the glow, snow up to her knees, her baby silent against her chest. A low wood cabin stood at the edge of a fenced pasture, smoke curling from the chimney. Shadows moved inside. She raised a hand, knocked once, twice, then slumped against the door. It opened fast. A tall man stood in the doorway, coat thrown over a worn shirt, his dark hair damp from the snow. His eyes met hers sharp, startled, and then dropped to the bundle in her arms. Odessa's voice cracked. "Please, my baby, he is freezing." The man stepped aside instantly. "Get in." She half fell through the doorway. Heat hit her like a blow. Her knees buckled, and the man caught her under the arms, guiding her to a bench near the fire. "I only need a place for the night," she said, trying to push herself upright. "Just until morning." "You can barely stand," he said, crouching beside her. His eyes were warm now, steadier. "Let me see the baby." She hesitated, then unwrapped the quilt. The man leaned in, careful, and touched 2 fingers to the baby's cheek. "He is cold," Odessa said, voice shaking. "We will make room," the man said. "I am Owen Avery. This is my place." Odessa. Odessa Albright. Her arms tightened around the baby. "His name is Samuel." Owen nodded once. Then he rose, crossed to a trunk, and pulled out a thick wool blanket. He returned, knelt, and wrapped the baby tight, his hands sure and gentle. "You have a fire, food?" she asked, eyes flicking around. "I do. You will eat, then rest." She shook her head. "I can work. I do not want charity." Owen looked at her, quiet for a moment. "You are not getting charity. You are getting human decency." That nearly split her in two. She turned her face away, blinking fast. He did not push. He just rose again, went to the hearth, and ladled stew from a pot into a tin bowl. He set it in front of her with a spoon, then poured water into a cup and offered it next. Odessa ate slowly, lips numb, hands shaking. The stew was thick beans, salt pork, potatoes. It tasted like something made with care. Owen sat across the room on a crate, arms resting on his knees. He watched the fire more than her. "You live out here alone?" she asked after a while. "I do," she nodded. "I have not seen a soul in 20 miles. You should not have been walking in this." "I did not have a choice." Owen looked over then. "Where is his father?" Odessa hesitated, then met his eyes. "He is not coming back." Owen gave a single nod. "Well, you are here now." She did not know what to do with that. The steadiness of it. The way he said it, like it meant something, like she was not a burden or a mistake. Later, after the baby had been fed and swaddled, she sat on the floor in front of the fire, her back against the wall. Owen laid out one of his bedrolls for her, close to the hearth. "You can take the bed," she said quietly. "I will take the floor," he answered. She looked up, something heavy in her chest easing just slightly. "Thank you," he nodded once. "Good night, Odessa," she whispered it back. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin, it was warm. Odessa curled around Samuel and listened to the fire crackle. For the first time in weeks, she knew her son would make it through the night. And when she closed her eyes, She saw the way Owen had looked at her baby like he mattered, like he was not something to be turned away. She had gambled everything to knock on that door. And somehow, she had won. Morning light seeped through the frost-laced window panes, soft and pale. Odessa opened her eyes to the quiet pop of coals shifting in the hearth. The cabin smelled faintly of ash and old pine, and the baby stirred against her chest, warm beneath layers of wool. She traced his cheek with her fingertip. Color had returned there, faint, but steady. She sat up slowly, joints aching from the hard floor, and caught sight of Owen through the open door of the lean-to kitchen. He was bent over a basin, sleeves rolled high, scrubbing something with brisk, practiced movements. His back was broad, worn shirt tucked into canvas trousers darkened at the knees. There was no noise aside from the scrape of tin, and the low whistle he gave every so often, low, tuneless, and absent. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she rose and moved to the hearth, cradling Samuel as she added a log to the embers and coaxed the flame. The warmth felt earned this morning, not borrowed. "I didn't take your bed," Owen said from the doorway, drying his hands on a flour sack towel. "Didn't figure you'd rest there well anyhow." "I wouldn't have," she said, without apology. He nodded once, then crossed to the cupboard and brought out a small crock. "There's coffee, bitter as sin, but it'll wake you." She adjusted Samuel in her arms and took the tin cup he handed her. The taste made her wince, but it was hot, and it cleared the fog behind her eyes. "I'll work for my keep," she said, not looking up. "I'm not afraid of labor." "I figured that much when you showed up half dead at my door," he said, not unkindly. "What did you do before?" "Cooked in a boarding house in Cheyenne," she said. "Before that, cleaned rooms in a hotel. I can sew, patch, mend. I've helped calve before, though I won't pretend to know much beyond keeping my hands clean and listening close." He leaned against the table, arms folded. "That's enough." She looked at him then. "You're not curious how I ended up walking through a snowstorm?" "No," he said. "You were cold and your boy needed shelter. Whatever came before doesn't matter more than that." She stared at him for a long moment. "That's a rare answer," he shrugged. "I've lost enough not to ask after what someone's already survived." Odessa felt that settle somewhere deep. Words didn't rise easily after that, so she carried the baby to the cot by the hearth and laid him down, folding the blanket close around him. "Is there something you need done?" she asked, straightening. Owen glanced out the window. Fence lines sagging east of the barn. Snow dragged it down. "I could use another set of hands to hold the posts while I brace them." "I'll get my boots." He stepped toward the door, then paused. "There's a sling in the trunk, canvas and rope. You can wear him on your front. Leaves both hands free." She didn't speak, just nodded once and moved toward the trunk he'd mentioned. Outside, the wind had died, but the cold hung thick in the air. The snow was packed hard beneath their feet, crunching with each step toward the barn. Odessa moved carefully, the baby nestled against her chest, arms tucked in tight, breathing even. Owen handed her the post maul and motioned to the line of leaning rails. "Start at the first. I'll reset the rails once they are upright." She nodded once and set her shoulder against the post, digging her boots into the crust of snow. The work was slow, muscles burning with each swing, but it steadied her, gave her something to press against besides uncertainty. By the time they reached the third post, sweat had soaked through her collar despite the cold. Owen caught her eye. "You've got grit," he said. "Not many would have lasted long in that wind." She didn't answer, just shifted her stance and drove the post deeper. They worked in silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel weighted. She noticed the way Owen moved, economical, sure. Nothing wasted. He didn't watch her like she was fragile. He handed her tools when she needed them, offered steady hands when a post leaned too far, but otherwise let her do the job. When the last post was set, they walked back toward the cabin. The sun had climbed, casting sharp lines across the snow. Odessa's breath steamed in front of her, her legs rubbery but firm under her. At the stoop, Owen opened the door for her and waited as she stepped inside. "There's venison stew left over," he said. "You can heat it if you're hungry." "I am," she said. "But I'd like to wash first." "There's a basin in the back room," he said. "Water's cold but clean." She nodded and stepped past him, the baby still pressed close, sleeping soundly. He watched her go, then turned back to the fire, stoking it higher. Neither of them said it aloud, but something had shifted between them out by the fence, under the pale winter sun. Not soft, not sudden. Just the quiet beginning of something steady, like a post set deep in frozen earth, braced to hold against the wind. By the fourth day, the rhythm between them had settled into something unspoken, but understood. Odessa rose early, fed Samuel in the quiet before dawn, then stepped into the day with sleeves rolled and eyes sharp. Owen didn't ask what she would take on. He simply handed her what was needed and let her decide how far she'd go. That morning, she found him in the tack shed rubbing linseed into a saddle cinch, so worn it had gone gray around the edges. He looked up when she stepped inside, then turned back to his work. "I can patch the torn rigging," she said, "if you've got canvas thick enough." He nodded toward a crate in the back. "Bottom left." "You'll need the Glover's needle." She crouched by the box, sifting through bundles of folded cloth and scraps of hide, until she found a piece strong enough to hold under weight. She brought it to the bench beside him and ran her thumb along the seam that had given way. "You work leather?" he asked. "Some," she said. "I used to stitch boots for a cobbler in Missouri, before Cheyenne." He didn't respond, but she noticed the brief pause in his hands before he returned to oiling the strap. They worked side by side for a long while, the only sound the scrape of cloth and the soft breath of the horses in the adjoining stall. Eventually, he spoke again. "There's a town about 20 miles west," he said. "Medicine Bow. I make the trip every few weeks. Trade mail. Next time I go, I'll take you with me, see what you need." "I've got what I need," she said, not looking up. "Still," he said, "you might want cloth, thread, things for the boy." She hesitated, then set the needle down. "I'm not used to anyone thinking ahead for me." Owen didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You're not alone anymore." She didn't reply. She couldn't have, even if she'd wanted to. The leather gave easily under her needle and her stitches came clean and tight. When she was done, she held it up and turned it in the slant of light from the window. Owen glanced over, gave a slight nod. "Good work," he said. That afternoon, the wind lifted and the sky cleared enough to bring out the horses. Odessa came outside with Samuel strapped snug to her back, wrapped in a blanket that had once smelled of lye and now smelled faintly of pine smoke and her skin. Owen was at the corral, leading a bay gelding in slow circles, testing a new shoe. "He yours?" she asked. "Bought him last spring," he said. "Got sense, but he don't like the cold." She reached for the reins and held them loosely. The horse snorted once, then settled his head against her hand. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well," she said, "but I stayed on." He gestured toward the fence. "We can fix that, come spring." They stood there a while, the wind tugging at their coats, the horse shifting beneath the weight of stillness. Samuel stirred once, but didn't wake. Owen looked toward the tree line, then back at her. "There's a creek below that ridge. Runs year-round. Good place to wash clothes once the ice thaws." She nodded slowly. "I'll remember." He studied her for a moment. "You planning to stay?" Her hand stilled on the horse's bridle. The question hung between them, not demanding but waiting. "I hadn't planned anything past that night," she said. "I figured," he said. She turned to face him, the sun catching the edge of her face. "I don't want to be a guest." "You're not," he said. "You've earned your place." Her throat tightened. "Then yes, I'll stay." He nodded once. Then he turned back to the horse, and she stood beside him, both watching the gelding's breath curl in the cold air like smoke. Inside, the light faded slow. Odessa rocked Samuel near the hearth and hummed low into his hair. Owen sat by the wall, sharpening a blade with long, even strokes. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It had the shape of something settled. When the baby finally slept, Odessa laid him down and covered him gently. She turned then, and Owen's eyes were already on her. "I don't know how to be looked after," she said, quiet. "You don't need to know," he said. "You just let it happen." She crossed the room and stood beside him. He didn't reach for her, but he didn't look away either. "You said I'm not alone," she said. "You're not." She drew in a breath. "Then don't leave room for doubt." Owen set the blade aside and rose slowly. "There isn't any." The space between them closed with a kind of reverence. No rush, no fire, just the quiet certainty of something beginning where everything else had once ended. She reached for his hand. He took it, steady and sure. Not a promise, just truth. They stood like that as the fire dimmed and the wind outside turned soft against the walls. Owen stood at the barn wall, testing the weight of a half-filled grain sack, the late afternoon sun casting long bands of gold through the slats. Behind him, Odessa's footsteps padded soft over packed earth. He didn't turn right away. He'd come to know the sound of her walk, the evenness of it, the way it never rushed. "I found turnips in the root cellar," she said. "They've kept better than I expected." He set the sack down and wiped his palms on his trousers. "You thinking to stew them or roast?" "Roast. I've got vinegar left and I boiled down the pork drippings." He nodded once, then met her eyes. "You plan meals like you're staying through spring." "I am," she said, simple as that. They walked back toward the cabin together, boots sinking into the softening snow. The thaw had begun, slow and wet, loosening the ice at the eaves and sending thin trickles down the slope behind the fence. Water pooled near the shed door, soaking into the earth. Owen stepped around it, then paused. "I'll dig a trench tomorrow, keep the runoff from flooding the feed sacks. I'll string the clothesline behind the coop," she said. "If the weather holds, we can wash the bedding." There wasn't a question in either voice, only the shared knowledge of what needed doing. Inside, Samuel slept tucked in a cradle Owen had built from the pine staves of an old barrel. Odessa had lined it with scraps from a worn muslin shirt and a strip of flannel she'd brought from Cheyenne. His cheeks were pink with sleep, one fist curled by his mouth. Owen crouched beside the cradle and adjusted the quilt. "He's filling out." She stirred the fire. "He's quiet because he knows he's safe." Owen's gaze lingered on the child a moment longer before he rose. "You've been quiet yourself today." "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I want to build here." He took a seat at the table, waiting. "I never had land," she said. "Never stayed anywhere long enough to plant something and see it come up, but I think I'd like to try." Owen leaned back slightly. "There's room for more than cattle here, with the right fence and seed. I can grow kitchen herbs," she said. "Peas, maybe. Beans if the soil's right. I'll show you where the ground stays soft through summer," he said. "Near the ash trees past the paddock." She moved to sit across from him, her hands folding in her lap. "I'd need a pen for hens if we want eggs come fall. We can build one next week." Their eyes met, and the silence that followed was full, not empty. "I want more than safety, Owen," she said. He didn't flinch. "So do I. But I need to know I'm not just passing through in your life." "You're not," he said it low, but without hesitation. "You changed the shape of this place the second you stepped in." She looked away then, not from doubt, but from the weight of being believed. He reached across, not to take her hand, but to rest his palm on the table between them. You've been carrying everything by yourself for so long, I think you forgot what it feels like to lean. She looked down at his hand, weathered and still. I remember now, she said. I remember. That night, while the turnips roasted and the air filled with the warm tang of vinegar and smoke, Owen brought in a basket of kindling and set it beside the hearth. Odessa was at the basin, rinsing the last dish with melted snow water. She dried her hands and turned just as he stood straight. I've been thinking too, he said. She waited. I've got a deed that covers this land and the hills above it, he said. There's no name on it but mine. But if you want a place that's yours, really yours, I'd see it changed. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. I'm not offering out of duty, he added. I'm offering because I want to build something that doesn't end with winter. She stepped to him, slow and sure, and laid her hand over his heart. Then let's build it, she said. All of it. He nodded once, then leaned in, his forehead brushing hers. The fire crackled behind them, and outside, the last snowmelt dripped steady from the roof. The night stretched quiet and whole around them. In that cabin on the edge of Elk Mountain, with the warmth of a child's cradle and the soft weight of two lives leaning into one another, the long season of waiting had ended. What remained now was theirs to shape. By late March, the soil near the ash trees softened beneath Odessa's boots, and the frost lifted in ribbons from the furrows Owen turned with the plow. The wind still held teeth in the shade, but the light stayed longer now, and the land stirred with the quiet expectancy of spring. Odessa knelt in the loam, planting peas in even rows. Samuel rapped on her back, humming softly against her spine. Owen worked a few yards off, splitting cedar rails for the hen pen. His rhythm never faltered, but his gaze found her often, not with urgency, just the ease of a man who knew where his heart lived. That evening, after the sun lowered behind the ridge and the cabin filled with the scent of stewed onions and wild sage, Owen stood by the window, watching the last light stretch across the pasture. I've been thinking about the upper field, he said. It's never been cleared, but there's good earth under the scrub. If we worked it slow, we could plant oats come next year. Odessa folded a towel along the line near the stove. You thinking to keep more horses? Maybe a pair, he said. Or trade feed to the stage lines passing through Medicine Bow. They're always short come winter. She glanced toward the cradle where Samuel slept with one arm flung above his head. You could build a lean-to up there, she said. Store hay without hauling it all the way back here. Owen stepped closer. You see things I don't. I see what's possible, she answered. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing her wrist. So do I. That night, Odessa lay beside him beneath quilts stitched from the remnants of Owen's old shirts and the blue calico she'd brought west in the bottom of her satchel. The fire burned low, and Samuel stirred once and settled again. Owen's breath warmed the back of her neck. You ever think you'd have this? He asked quietly. She turned to face him. I used to dream about it, but dreams don't hold weight like this does, not like a child's breath, or the feel of your hand steadying mine when the wind kicks up. He brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. Some things are worth building slow, she nodded. You gave me space. Let me find my footing. I've waited on a lot of things in my life, he said. But I never minded waiting for you. She leaned in, lips finding his in a kiss that was neither rushed nor tentative, but deep and sure, like water meeting earth. The next weeks passed in quiet labor. Odessa stitched new curtains from an old flour sack and hung them in the window above the basin. Owen re-chinked the cabin's west wall and sanded a cradle board he carved when Samuel began to stretch beyond the barrel cradle. Together, they laid stones for a path between the door and the garden rows. One clear morning, Odessa brought out a parcel wrapped in muslin and set it on the table between them. "I had this made in Cheyenne," she said, unwrapping the paper. "Didn't know if I'd ever use it." Inside lay a small silver ring, plain and unadorned. Owen stared at it, then met her gaze. "You carried that all this way?" "I carried hope," she said. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a band of his own, carved from a strip of cedar, oiled and smooth. "I didn't have silver," he said, "but I had what mattered." She smiled, eyes bright. "Let's say our vows here. Just us." So in the pasture where the fence stood strong and the garden rows ran straight, they stood hand in hand. Samuel nestled against Odessa's chest and spoke words that needed no witness but the land that held them. "I'll walk beside you," Owen said. "Through drought, through snow, through every season this place sees. I'll plant with you, raise our son with you," Odessa answered. "And no matter the storms, I'll stay." They exchanged rings, and Owen kissed her like a man who knew exactly what he'd been given. The cabin became more than shelter, it became a home. Owen built shelves for her spices, and Odessa taught him to mend seams so he'd never go without what he needed. Samuel grew strong, crawling before the hearth, chasing after Owen's boots with wide eyes and fierce laughter. Come summer, Odessa stood beneath a cottonwood with a basket of beans while Owen worked the oats in the upper field. When he came down for supper, his arms were dusted with chaff, his face sun warmed and lined with contentment. He set down the scythe and kissed her temple. "I never believed in luck." "Neither did I," she said, "but I believe in this." And they did not just endure, they flourished. They raised chickens, then goats, tilled a second plot for squash and corn. Taught Samuel to hold a hammer and later, gently, how to listen for the sound of hooves in the quiet. He grew up in a house where love wasn't spoken often, but lived daily in the bread Odessa baked, in the tools Owen left sharpened on the porch rail, in the way their hands found each other without needing to ask. Years passed, and the land bore witness to it all. Snow came and went, fences aged and were rebuilt, and still the cabin stood firm, filled with laughter and warmth and the scent of wild mint. And when the days grew long and Samuel chased the wind across the pasture, Odessa and Owen watched from the stoop, fingers twined, hearts steady. They had not found each other easily, but they had stayed and grown and loved until there was nothing left unfinished between them. And that, at last, was everything.